what I'm going to talk about, I thought, well, what can I talk about that's important to the different facets of you guys involved in sport and coaching, and some of teams, some of individual athletes, some within clubs, some within organisations, and something that's been, well, in my, I guess as a program manager, experience, something that is, I guess, at the core of a lot of the success and a lot of the failings, I believe has been is culture of your team. So we're going to talk about, Nick was all numbers and science, and I'm going to just be words and feelings. But at the end of the day, I think it really results in just having strong teams that are going to perform better for themselves and makes your job a whole lot easier. So I'm talking about, we'll probably touch on culture at the end, but leadership, responsibility, accountability, ownership and empowerment, independence versus individualism, inspiration versus motivation. So leadership. Leadership's obviously the cornerstone of any well-functioning organisation and team. Leadership is necessary to maintain and instill culture. Everything's going to come back to culture. Leadership's necessary to guide the behaviours and expectations of the people within your group. Leaders can come from individuals, groups of people, or preferably within an organisation from both types. It's common practice now, you see in sporting teams, namely probably the football teams are the one, they all talk about the leadership group. This has been brought to the leadership group and to discuss there. And that's great. The leadership group is usually a group of their peers, so other players from a range of, I guess, age, experience and skills. Who are leaders? Well, leadership is a skill. It can be learned, and the qualities present are usually charisma, good communication skills, enthusiasm, ability, high motivation, and it's important to identify and nurture the natural leaders within groups. Here we go. The Bluestone Review was a review done of swimming following the Olympic Games, and one of their main comments is that first and foremost, the leadership of swimming should be in the hands of those people who are most effective and most competent at leadership. The leader doesn't have to be the best player on the team. The leader doesn't have to be the most experienced person on the team. Sometimes they are. The leader of your group should be the person that's most effective and most competent at leading. And leadership is so important that the first recommendation from the independent review into swimming was that Swimming Australia Board and senior management need to take a leading role in implementing change within the sport, promoting a culture of success, accountability, transparency throughout the sport of swimming. That's the number one recommendation from the review. That's how important leadership is. I don't know if you see this one, but this I see is a major hurdle for coaches of athletes, especially junior athletes and senior athletes now today, and a major cause of stress for coaches and teachers alike. There seems to be a real lack of responsibility and accountability of the athletes, and that comes from poor culture, I believe. Now, within your teams, personal responsibility and accountability from all members of the team must be discussed and transparent. When athletes don't perform, who's usually the first person to go? Coach. Exactly. We've lost a few in the last few weeks. But that's the culture that needs to change. But as a coach, you need to have a look and say, have you allowed your athletes to take some personal responsibility? or have you allowed them to be nonchalant and, I guess, get away with not being accountable or taking personal responsibility for their own actions? Ownership and empowerment. This is one that I find that works well and gets some good results and adherence from your athletes. Empowerment is owning a person owning the capacity to act rather than being acted on by someone else, by a coach. So you can see that a lot of these things intertwine. So you think about responsibility and accountability of the slide before. If your athlete isn't empowered and owning the capacity to act, where are they going to have their personal responsibility or personal accountability when they can very easily say, well, I'm just a product of the coach? So, by empowering your athlete, you're going to get better personal responsibility and accountability. The results of empowering an athlete, from a personal perspective, they develop a sense of self-confidence and capacity. They feel they can do more. With their relationships, they feel that the result is they feel they have the ability to influence, negotiate and make decisions. And from the collective, when individuals work together, you're usually achieving a more enhanced impact, a more pronounced impact there. You can empower, I think a good way to foster empowerment with your athletes is through participation. The easiest way to do this is in the decision-making process. You're going to a national championships or an overseas trip, and there's a team uniform that's going to be worn. Bring some athletes in and have them involved in the designing of the uniform. Even things as simple as that gives them some ownership of the greater group, and therefore empowering them. In developing some expectations and guidelines of behaviour. Going to the States to compete, okay guys, as a group, what will we accept from each other of performance and behaviour? Get the people involved in the decision-making process through participation. And also empower your staff. Have a working group that are actually listened to help you make decisions. And that empowers your staff to work with you and produce more for you. So I've, at the VIA swimming program, in the last year I instigated a swimming program management group, and it's just all the coaches that have athletes. We meet once a month, and it used to be we'd just talk about training, but we talk about how can the program do better, selection criteria, codes of conduct, what athletes can and should be selected onto certain teams, which ones won't, and we've had much better cohesion between the coaches, better information sharing, better adherence to any guidelines or expectations that we've put out there because of the transparency and the fact that they've had some ownership and input into that decision-making process. And by doing that, they will own their decisions, right? They'll feel empowered that they've acted, and will also, as a result, be accountable for their decisions, that's the payoff to coaches, is by empowering your athletes and having them involved in decisions. They've been involved in the decision, they are now accountable to the decision that they've helped make. Okay, this is a tough one but very important. Independence versus individualism. Independence is basically providing someone with the ability and opportunity to govern themselves. You are providing them with the opportunity to be independent. Individualism. That's really just go off and do your thing, okay? And leadership's absent and they do what they want. the ramifications of this within a team and a group is if you foster independence in your athletes, within a group you'll get more robust. Athletes are more self-aware of the process and the goals, and they'll do it for themselves. They'll be self-motivated and driven. But if there's individualism, talking to one athlete over here and saying, okay, do that, and then they do half the session and then they leave, but there's another athlete doing something else and they're not quite sure of what's going on. In the individuals, they'll have a diminished sense of responsibility. There'll be a decreased connectedness between those two athletes who are also supposed to be in a team together. There'll be individualism because now there's no leadership and they can do what they want. Sometimes they'll choose to want to do less and avoid certain things that are tough. And we've got to think about sport is about challenge. You're never going to get better if you don't challenge yourself. So there's avoidance and compromise there.
So is this part of that Bluestone review, was this one of the key factors that they identified?
There was one of the factors was that individualism, as opposed to the fostering independence, was an issue. While they tried to create independence and be individual with certain things, the individualism, resulted in diminished sense of responsibility and compromise, and then from a culture team perspective, that lack of connectedness. So that was something that did come out of there. Okay, how can we develop independence? Through tasks, like with in swimming programs, they have moving. You can take a long course pool, 50 metres, turn it into a short course pool, 25, and that's by moving a bulkhead. Some clubs, like a good way to do it would get two of the guys come in a bit earlier and they move the bulkhead for the session. Showing them how to do, letting them have a role in performing something that is usually done for them, but is going to help them. It was done many years ago, but doesn't seem to happen now. The washing of the uniforms. Someone was, you're washing the uniforms this day, and that's your role to do something that helps you and the team and requires you to do something independent from the team for the team. Carrying the gear bag. It used to be the rookie's job to, my brother played water polo, the rookie's job was to carry the caps. And if everyone didn't get their cap, it held a play. And consequence. It's if you gave them the uniforms to wash and they come back and they're not washed and it's like, oh, okay, I'll do them, you're not really helping anyone. So consequence through, I'll call them controlled punishments, in that you need to identify that not fulfilling a task has its consequences. So an example for us would be, maybe across these sports, you put in entries to go to an event and they need to be in by a certain date. Someone hasn't put their entries in, they have to go through the late entry process. Sometimes there's a fee involved and things like that, and usually it's, I was late, secretary sorts it out, and they do that. Well, what you do is, okay, the secretary may have to do it, but the athlete goes through the process and sees the stress and hassle and sometimes cost that goes into there. So that's a way to control consequence. It's not standing them in the corner.
Who were the team leaders on that Olympic swimming team this year?
There were a few. There was an athlete leadership group.
Yeah.
There's leadership management, and so the athlete leadership group had some senior athletes and athletes who had been on many teams. But again, the leadership group came together in that at that competition, and they weren't really a presence throughout the season, and then you're in that high pressure environment, and they really didn't have opportunities to enact any kind of leadership.
Yeah. So it was just basically a label that was given to them rather than they were actually being team leaders. Because they would all train like.
They were all different squads, so there was some from all
they're
different
from all
squads.
over the shop.
Yeah.
It's like any state team. They don't all train as a squad.
It was a leadership group by, I think, title alone, with their roles and responsibilities weren't outlined to them probably properly enough, and there was really no opportunities for them to lead anything, and then when you look at it, they've got their own things to do, and that's where that individualism comes into it. Like, everyone had their own job to do. No one was doing a job together. That's where I think a few of the issues there were. Good stuff. Inspiration versus motivation. Athlete at the moment saying, I'm not motivated, motivated, the coach doesn't motivate me. Well, people motivate themselves and leaders inspire people. So motivation is an inner drive to act towards a desired goal, and inspiration is an external influence that elicits ideas and enthusiasm. You know, an environment, a person can be inspirational, but motivation is the person's inner drive to act towards a desired goal. And you've all probably, getting to this level of the education, you would have heard of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic is, driven by interest or enjoyment in the task itself, and exists within the individual. And extrinsic is, reliance on external pressures or rewards, which brings us to fear. Well, fear is a brilliant motivator, but it's very, but I don't think you should use it with athletes because it's very short term, it's very short-lived. It's simple and effective, but over time it breeds resentment and disloyalty. We see, I guess, coaches from the old guard, where coaching was about you do this, was the old responsibility and accountability slide. Like, back then it was different. You could tell people to do things and they would do them. Whether sometimes they liked to do it and sometimes they didn't, but they did it. And that can breed resentment and disloyalty, and you're not going to get the good results there. Incentives. It's a great way to do it. If you do that, I'll give you this. If you do that, we'll give you money. Okay, great. I've done that, but now for me to do it again, I want more money. Or for me to do it again, I want more of what you had given me last time. So you either have to be heavily resourced, or come up with a different way to, the athlete needs to be motivated differently. And that has obviously a very short life. Motivation, a sense of purpose. Why are they there? Ask the athlete, how do you influence your teammates? Why do they train? So they're things that are intrinsic to the athlete. So you see, fear and incentives are very short-lived, short lifespan, fraught with danger. Resentment, disloyalty, needing to do more and more for diminishing returns. But conversely, sense of purpose. To create that feeling, or to nurture that in your athlete, it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, but what you get is long-term motivation, and that's and as a coach, that is the thing that, whether you do now or whether you realise it now or don't, that will be the thing that you will try and will strive to get from each and every one of your athletes, is long-term motivation.
Do you find, like if you look at it from the old days to these days, desire, which is your sense of purpose, do you reckon that's lacking now? Because back in the day where it wasn't as so heavily money orientated or whatever, the incentive was the winning feeling.
Yeah.
Now the incentive. I can't even say the word now. You know what I'm saying?
It's getting late.
Yeah, it's getting less because everyone's thinking more about the dollar value. Whereas I guess if you look at your grassroots people who don't get paid, you know, the reward is the win basically.
Yeah.
Is it not as important when it gets to that elite level where they, you know?
It is as important because
Well, it's
the
all about
money is
hard work that
tied.
goes
The
into
money's
it.
tied up in the wins a lot now. So winning is important, whether it's for the same reason. I'm a born cynic, but I'll try not to be now. And that, you know, believe that, well, human nature is to be intrinsically. People are intrinsically motivated by nature, and so if we can, I guess, nurture that intrinsic motivation in people by creating inspiring environments, creating purposeful, training sessions and competitions and outcomes and processes for these people. That's great. I guess to try and create something that's an inspirational, or to help people be intrinsically motivated and to create an inspirational environment is, talk to your athletes, get input. Ask them, are you getting what you want when you come to training? Again, like create open communication. Are you getting what you want? Are they getting what they need from training? Like, we had an athlete who was performing very, very well, and then we go, oh, you're in the elite squad now, that's great, go there, and then her performances went terrible. And what we did was we moved her from the squad where all her friends were, that she loved coming, on the bus with them after school, going to the training. It was great, they had this routine. She'd work her butt off because she wanted to beat all her friends. And then we took her to the squad that's half an hour later, so she stayed half an hour more at school, or mum picked her up, and then she lost the thing that motivated her, which was enjoyment in the training process. Ask them. I find it's really good to keep people informed, mainly of, we'll just go straight to the why. Tell them why they're doing that training session. Like a good one was, we were at a training session and one of the Olympic coaches told the athletes that this set is to address that 15 metres after you push off the wall in the last lap and feel your legs burning and you drop your knees. He said, this is the specific reason why we are doing this set. And they all applied themselves really well because they all knew how much that part of the race hurt and that this would help them. Challenge, recognition, appreciation and quality. People are motivated by all these things and all these different things. People are motivated by the challenge. Some people are motivated by recognition. Some people are motivated by appreciation. Some people are motivated by quality. Someone who's motivated by the challenge, do Friday night, that's a sprint night. Give them a chance to go one-on-one with their mates. Recognition. End of the session, Johnny did the set last week, he did, minute 10. This week he did it on minute 7. Like, that's good, because you know that Johnny likes recognition. Appreciation. Everyone's leaving. You grab the kid and you say, you did a really good job on that one. That was good, and it helped the team lift and you did everything well. And quality, just telling them that they did a great job in that training, like in that set, or that last 100 you did was really good. Ask yourselves what motivates you, and you'll realise, and talk to the coaches that you work with as well, of what motivates them. You realise there's a lot of different ways people, or what they're motivated by, and then you can start making sure you're adding all these things into your program. It's like the, you may have done the VARC learning thing where it's visual, audio, kinesthetic, and an R one. Reading, writing. And people learn and therefore are taught by different facets. And the best thing you can do is work out which one you are, and you realise that you rely heavily on that, and the only people that are getting what you put out are the ones that are the same as you. So as good coaches and teachers, you learn to work a bit of everything in. Give them a reason. No one wants to work their arse off for an arsehole. Like, make them, show them that you're proud of them, especially the younger ones. Proud of them. Show them that you appreciate their effort. Show them that they're doing a good job and that they make you proud, or things like that. Give them a reason to work their butts off, and they will. Set a standard. Are you tweeting while they are sweating? Like, if you're at the end of the pool, pool references, I apologise. If you're at the end of the pool reading the paper or on Facebook or what it is, then there's no way you can expect your athletes to be inspired or motivated if you're not showing, I guess, the same motivation and vivid to what's going on. Okay, the good stuff. Culture makes up all of these things. Consists of the beliefs, behaviours, objects and other characteristics common to the members of a particular group or society. It includes the culture of a team, includes many societal aspects, the language, the customs, the values, the norms, the mores, blah, 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 blah. So your culture is everything. It's how you talk to the other people, how you go about addressing losses, how you go about addressing success, how you go about consequence, how you go about reward, all those things. Values. Do we just, and this is the one, values, you can see changes in culture if you look at big sporting teams. Following success or repeated success, culture can change, much like failure. We talk about, shouldn't point at you and say failures. Much like, say, underperforming gives you an opportunity to change some culture or make some changes. The being very successful also makes it quite hard to continue to instill a strong culture. So you'll see, we were in, the VIS used to be in the Lexus Centre, now the Westpac Centre, now in a car-based centre, where Collingwood trains out of. And in my first 2 years, I saw them leading up to the grand final, and the one they won, and they worked as a group. They all worked hard. The gym was packed. They were all in there, but they won that grand final. Then the next year, there was all these little groups, like 4, and there was, Harry O'Brien had come in and do his, stuff by himself. Didak and some other guys would be doing some things by themselves, and all these little groups, and they were, you could see that whatever culture of team and high performance they had before had disappeared because they were calling the shots. But success had caused the culture to fall apart because no one was strong enough to keep it together. It's learned and transmitted between people. So everyone's involved in the culture and everyone is responsible for instilling it and teaching it to someone else, and vice versa. It grows over time and can be directed and shaped with strong leadership and sound methods. Leadership is paramount when it comes to instilling a culture. Your culture is what you do and say every day. And this is where we have issues like having a very expensive review of one of Australia's great sporting teams and sports happen on looking at culture. Because the symptoms of a bad culture are not usually immediately evident. It goes for a long time, and then there's a situation that arises that just shows you that, oh, hang on, something's gone wrong. Right. Developing effective team culture. The way to do this is goals and expectations. What do you, what are the goals of the team and what do you expect from the team? How can you facilitate feedback in developing these goals and the expectations? And what can you do to stress the goals and the expectations through the season? These are questions you need to ask yourself. What is the, what's the culture you're trying to achieve there? Supporting cast. How can you use team members and others in developing a team culture? How can you empower your team? Look around you. And again, like the leadership, it doesn't have to be the best performer or the highest paid football player or the most senior football player or the most experienced that's a leader. Just a person who's best in that role. I wasn't going to use this example, but I will. The movie Waterboy. He was brilliant at bringing out the water and having it ready, and they didn't have to worry, and it worked for the team. That's, it's a good example in a, excellent movie. So you look around the team and see who's good in specific roles. Like, there's a player on the Miami Heat that all he seems to do is high five the players when they come off. Plays for France at the Olympics, but he, the cheerleader, and he's important. We've people that train in our lanes that are never going to be an Olympian, but they train their guts out, and they're the first ones to be high-fiving people when they get out of the pool, and they're the one that organises the quiz night. Their role is important in the team culture. Praise. If your culture values hard work, you need to praise hard work. If the things you want in your culture are happening, you need to praise it, not just what's not happening. You need to praise the goal attainment in a team setting as well. By doing that, it sets a tone for the team on how to live the culture, and that's very important. Advertise. What are ways that your team can show off the culture and uniqueness during the season? If part of your culture is that, your culture and the team's agreed that you all give 100% every time. Training, competition, in a heat, in a semi, in a final, you give 100%. You go to that competition and, you wear you get t-shirts printed up that say 100% on it. You're showing to each other that you support the culture of 100%. You're showing to others what's unique to your culture, and you're investing in your culture and your identity, and that's very important. It may sound quite Mickey Mouse, but it's very important. Now, your turn. I want you to go, the team gymnastics is a good one if you guys want to join up there as well, 4 and U4. When you get together and pretend you're a team, or maybe use a life-saving team as an example, and track and field team over here, and obviously gymnastics. I want to think about how your team is perceived. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about some words that people, or do it for your own teams, and then we'll fire a few at me at the end. Think about how you're perceived. How would someone media opponents, people within the team, how would they describe your team?
Involvement.
Alright.
It's weak.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what did you guys use as a team? And
We hit up first with professional
yep,
and respectful through the group and the lunch, obviously. Well organised.
Like on time, committed.
Compass.
I'm down at 12.
so all good things.
Oh, absolutely.
Who would perceive a team as all good things?
Oh, certainly.
Gymnastics.
Yeah, that's going to be all good things too. Passionate, talented, hardworking, dedicated, and caring. I'm trying to think of bad things.
I'm sure you had plenty for the swim team.
Yeah.
And guys,
Oh, we only really come up with one with, I guess, professionalism, I guess, so.
it's a good one. Well, okay, considering they were just all great, each group just shout out a perception of the Australian swim team currently that they would have.
Discipline.
Disciplined,
Disarray.
Individualized.
visualised.
I think that's pretty hard as well. Like as athletes work their arse off, I think that's pretty hard to look at them and judge without knowing all the facts.
Yeah, well that's,
And just
you
knowing the
know,
media
but,
facts.
Unfortunately, that's what the media.
yeah, but it's your, like, so
So,
it's your
yeah.
perception of,
But sometimes perceptions can be skewed
Another good-
through media.
correct.
Tweeting.
So, okay, we've got undisciplined and individualised, so now we've got something else. Okay, okay, how would you like to be perceived? Like what are, there's things that you would like if someone looked in, how would you like them to describe you? Your
Intimidating.
group, your team.
Intimidate.
Intimidating?
Leaders and sort of an inspiration to the team.
Strong.
Yeah, strong. That's the
Mm.
perfect word, I reckon.
Skillful.
Skillful.
Successful.
Successful.
Motivated.
Knowledgeable. And professional.
And professional. And I dare say that the swim team, I'll speak on behalf, would like to say that they would like to be perceived as professional, hardworking, and committed. Okay, so we've got those, you've got how you're perceived, everyone seems to be doing everything, don't think they'd be perceived in any bad light. How would you like to be perceived? There's some things that came out there, and so professional, intimidating, skillful. What we need to look at now is, the actions and behaviours. So let's pick being professional. What are some actions and behaviours? And you need to be very specific here. Like you can't say, like if part of your culture is to be professional, or an action and behaviour is to be professional, you don't say to an athlete, do professional. There's actions or behaviours that they do that are indicative of acting or behaving professionally. So, what do you think are some examples of?
Being prepared before you go to your athletes, having a plan
Yep.
for the day.
Being punctual.
So that's a good action for a coach
Yeah, I thought
to
you were talking about coaches.
for the action for a coach to be is as important as everything else. So for the coach to show a professional thing, needs to be prepared for every session, and that's the coach's action to do that. Being punctual is a very basic and easy action. One of our ones, if we'd expect a professional if the session we say you need to be there 10 minutes before the session to do stretching is going to help you. Be here 10 minutes before and do this battery of stretches, because doing that process and that action behaviour is considered as a professional behaviour, and it's something they can do. Now, every time they do this, and every time you go to a session fully prepared, every time the athletes are punctual, you are getting, you're closer to creating the perception of professionalism and growing that team culture. Unfortunately and conversely, anytime a player takes a shortcut, or you don't go to your session prepared, or someone turns up late, then a little piece of the perception is eroded and your team culture takes a small but very significant hit. And it's those, by not rewarding adhering to the culture and by not having consequences for not adhering to the culture, that's where issues come in. Feedback. Creating and maintaining a culture, a positive and progressive and a high performance culture, is an enormous challenge, and it requires a lot of discipline from everyone within. Therefore, much like every facet of life, regular feedback's a pretty powerful tool to keep people on the right track. Probably a good rule is, if you see it, say it. If you see something good happening, say it. If you see something bad happening, say it. If something's going against your culture, you do it. It's a tough process. Don't do it in reviews, not crisis meetings, nothing like that. It's a day-to-day. We said at the very start, and it's tough to, especially with young athletes, to have them in, to be able to give constructive criticism in a safe environment. But it's very important. Looking at professionalism, when Rod McQueen was, I think, coaching the Wallabies when they turned professional, and all of a sudden you had these kids overnight had $200,000 put into their accounts, and the culture of the team was threatened by these external forces, and one of the things he had was they had to submit a diary to him every Monday morning. And he said in the presentation, he goes, it was not about me wanting to know what had happened the week before. It was the process of keeping a diary and handing it in on a Monday that everyone had to do, regardless of how successful or their place on the team. It was the act of doing that showed to each other that they were professional, and that helped instill their culture. But you look at all major sporting teams, that Australian ones that you used to be proud of, and now maybe not so much. And a lot of the arguments that you'll say as to why, you can pretty much attribute to a breakdown in some part of what was good culture. With the feedback, I think having your groups coming together to talk about and providing constructive criticism on areas of your culture, while tough and uncomfortable, if your group's able to do that, it shows that not only are they committed to and doing what is required to grow the culture, they'll be on the right track to doing what you both want for performance. Now with that, that's me. With that activity there, I think that's a good one to go back to your greater groups and your clubs and run through that activity. Sit down and create your team culture. If you don't have, an outline of, I guess, can be called a mission, a vision, the opening statement on your website, or, our club is committed to, if you don't have something like that, it's really important to develop it. And it's something that takes a while to grow. So the earlier you start it, and the more committed you are to it, the better it's going to work out. Otherwise, like I said, the symptoms of poor culture usually don't show their face until it's too late to turn around. And it's the same, if a strong culture can last for a long time, but so can a toxic one. And so if you can get in the way there, and it'll pay dividends for you in having robust athletes, motivated athletes, more transparency and cohesion in your groups. It's probably it's a very important thing to do for your groups. So for those activities, the how are you perceived? The how are you perceived? So ask yourselves, well, what are people looking at? There's things you don't like. How can you enact change? How would you like to be perceived? If you want to be professional and you want your athletes to be seen as professional, you do that. One could be, okay, yeah, we're professional in that, but people don't think that we get along. We'd like to be perceived as a team who love each other and care about each other. So how can we instill that? The actions and behaviours, be specific. It doesn't have to be that many. Keeping a diary is a very basic one. Turning up to training on time. Everyone knows that that's important to the culture of your team, then they'll do it. And then feedback is, how do you address it when they do it, and how do you address it when they don't?